My first kind of introduction and interest in Palladio came about because I was taught by a great architectural theorist, Colin Rowe, who wrote a highly influential essay in the 1950s called The Mathematics of the Ideal Villa. And in that he did something which I think was very important, remains very important for practicing architects, was he made a proposal about the relationship between the modern architecture of Le Corbusier and the architecture of Palladio. And he made an analysis, a comparison that showed or demonstrated in his view that there was a kind of underlying order, geometric order common to Palladio and to Corbusier. And this kind of overcame, I think, for architects of my generation, the kind of polarity and difficulty of relating practicing architecture, the architecture of our generation to history. It was a way of getting into history, a way, as it were, of getting under the skin of classicism and understanding what it was really about. Practicing architects can have a relationship with history, which is a kind of relationship in which you effect translations of historical ideas into a modern language, a modern architectural language. In other words, you get beyond questions of style. You get into much deeper kinds of question, and that interests me enormously. And when we were commissioned to design and develop a headquarters training building for Cambridge Wireless in Warwickshire, that kind of translating concept was very, very important. It's a translation, I suppose one would say, a translation of the notion of the Palladian villa being not only a flagship, but a working building, a working farm in the Palladian context. Rather like a Palladian villa, it pushes out its wings, which in the case of the Palladian villa were the working parts of the building. In this case, it pushes out the wings, which are the training parts of the building, out from the center. And the wings embrace the landscape in the same way as the wings of a Palladian villa may embrace the landscape. It's a relationship, of course, which has another kind of historical dimension, because it's the relationship of the English country house to its estate, which is a direct legacy of Palladio and the Palladian villa. An influence on this building, this Cambridge Wireless building, was some drawings of Utzon's when Utzon was designing the Sydney Opera House. And at a certain level, without wanting to stretch a point, because this isn't as dramatic as a building as the Sydney Opera House, there was an idea of Utzon's that the Opera House would consist of a great base, a great kind of masonry plateau, above which the sails of the building would kind of float. And he did some extraordinary drawings while he was developing the Opera House of clouds, of cumulus clouds over plateau, natural plateaus in South America, and also the equivalent in Oriental architecture of the light structure floating over the base of the Chinese or Japanese temple. And that developed in the Cable and Wireless building, as you can see, into an idea of a masonry, in this case concrete, structure, above which the waving blue roofs float and are sort of suspended on very fine steel needles that keep these sails or these clouds floating across the base. So the Palladianism has been subsumed into other kinds of ideas, and I think that's a characteristic of modern architecture. One of the kind of effects that Palladian architecture has on me, this is quite subjective really, is a sense of a commanding intelligence and a kind of rather awesome sort of certainty that his architecture conveys to me. I would say that architects of my generation, at least some of us, are very open and, in a sense, very susceptible to all kinds of influences, historical influences. The important thing for me is that I'll use the word again, we translate our influences into authentic ideas of the present, of contemporary architecture, so that people won't necessarily see where these things come from, that they've been properly kind of digested and they've been translated into new and hopefully original kinds of syntax. I could see that you could have important dialogues between new architecture and historical architecture, and those dialogues are not dialogues of style, they're dialogues of intent and purpose, sharing purposes with the past.